Hi, we're at the Ray Bradbury Experience Museum in Ray Bradbury's Greentown, Wauke-Con, Illinois. Last fall, we invited people to put their name on a flame. So they sent in titles of banned books to honor Banned Books Week. And now they are on a display at the museum. And today we have here Orty Ortwein, and he's going to tell us a little bit about Ray Bradbury and Fahrenheit 451. Orty, how did you come about your interest in Ray Bradbury?
I've been reading Ray Bradbury ever since I was a kid. Like, Fahrenheit was really the first classic book that I read. I just picked it up, and I've been reading everything of his since. So I've read pretty much everything by him.
Great. So you picked a book for your name on a flame.
That's me, yeah.
Which one is yours? There it is.
Yeah.
Why did you pick To Kill a Mockingbird?
You know, that was another classic. I was assigned reading it as a kid, and I thought it would be boring, and I picked it up, and I just couldn't put it down. And it kind of broke my heart to hear that some schools weren't teaching it anymore, that there were various campaigns against it. So that one has a personal connection for me.
Okay. Could you tell us, how did Ray Bradbury develop the idea of writing about this topic?
Well, there's a few different things. He'd been writing about censorship for a few years, and a lot of those short stories, like The Pedestrian, are kind of folded into Fahrenheit. And basically, it was a very paranoid time. This is the Cold War. McCarthyism was on full blast. He later named that as one of his inspirations. And he was also concerned about the rise of television and what that was doing to people's consumption of information. Everything's moving faster. You know, pop culture, everything is just going at a much faster pace. So it was kind of a gradual process, and he did write a kind of a long short story or a short novel called The Fireman, which was published in Galaxy magazine, and he was encouraged by his agent to expand that into a novel, and so that was what he did. And then, so he goes to the UCLA library, and back then they had those rent typewriter things. You put in a dime for a half hour. So he goes with a bag of dimes, and he later claimed it was 98 dimes that led to the first draft of Fahrenheit 451. And then the title he came up with he saw a ray of sunshine fall on a book, and that gave him the idea for writing a title based on the combustible point of paper. And he called a few different experts before. He called the fire department, and they were the ones who said they think the burning point of paper is 451. And also, I should also point out, here in Waukegan, a lot of his male relatives were volunteer firemen, and as a boy, he spent a lot of time at local firehouses, so you see some of that influence in there too.
Oh, that's fascinating, and it's so exciting to be standing here right now in Ray's hometown, where the seeds of those ideas started. We say that Ray Bradbury could often be prescient and farsighted. Was there any predictions in Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 that we're living?
Yeah, I mean, lots and lots of them. You know, we now have, what you're doing right now, your phone. I mean, that was something he kind of predicted. Like TV, being able to watch a TV on a tiny little screen in the woods, that's at the end of Fahrenheit 451. And that's come true. And also the opposite direction, these TVs that take up entire walls. We see that as well. We are starting with self-driving cars. We even kind of sort of have a mechanical hound. I've seen that on the internet anyway. So there's lots of that, the way people are constantly plugging their ears or their eyes with entertainment all the time. You see that in Fahrenheit. And then there's also just a more general talk in culture. I mean, whenever there's debates about censorship or freedom of press, Ray Bradbury is often quoted by people on both the right and the left. So I think he was very prescient in this whole idea of, what you can or cannot say in, mass culture.
That is so true. You can unfold Ray Bradbury's thoughts endlessly, and he's so relevant today. I know, Orty, you wanted to tell us a little bit about let's walk over here to the inside of the museum briefly. Sure. And you wanted to tell us about how the reception of the book was when it was first published. And so we're at this display. Could you tell us what it's about?
Yeah, so we're very lucky to have these. These are only the second, third, and fourth issues of Playboy ever printed. This is the very beginning of Playboy magazine. And, Playboy is much more famous for publishing, something else. But they also are still a very respected publisher of science fiction And this begins with Fahrenheit 451. A lot of people, now it already had been published as a book. I don't want to give the impression that Playboy published it first, but what happened was Hugh Hefner had been a fan of Bradbury's for years. And when he was launching this new magazine, he goes to Bradbury's agent and says, I'll give you, I think it was $200 for anything of Bradbury's. And Bradbury had actually been in Ireland. He was working for John Huston doing a screenplay. So he didn't really have anything new. So he gets Fahrenheit. And so they serialized it in the second, third, and fourth issues of Playboy.
So these are on display here at the museum, the actual magazines that were the serialization as they did in those days. Serialize a whole novel of Fahrenheit. And the, again, what is the connection between Hefner because of the topic of Ray Bradbury and the censorship issue, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting that it's published by Hefner of all people, because he had, as you can imagine, all sorts of issues with censorship, and he really tested the limits for what was considered publishable at that time. And it actually, Bradbury would publish with Playboy for the rest of his career, really through the 90s. And not just him. I mean, you know, Heinlein published in Playboy, so did Isaac Asimov. I mean, really, most of the top science fiction writers of the 20th century, the later half, would publish in Playboy. So it begins kind of a greater relationship between Playboy and science fiction, and it all started here.
With Fahrenheit 451.
With Fahrenheit 451.
Okay, well, thank you, Orty, and thank you for submitting your name, along with all the people who submitted other titles, and we celebrate Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, which was a banned book.
Yeah.